Welcome to We the People with Umair Khan and listeners. Today, I have a follow-up of my earlier conversation in relation to sexual abuse in context of religious institutions and religious leaders. It deemed appropriate that instead of just me talking to you or me presenting one side of things or facts or information, I get someone on board who has worked in this context, who has worked with real individuals. So that is why I wanted to bring in Durdana.
So, hi everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. My name is Durdana Ahmed, and just to provide some background of my background, I've been in the social work field for about 15 years. And when I initially started off working in this field, I worked at a children's shelter, and this was for very young children for up to 6 years old, and I worked there for about 3 years. And the children came from different backgrounds, and they were abused children, mostly sexually abused, or there was domestic violence in the family, so they'd seen physical abuse, they'd been through it. So all kinds of different spectrum in domestic violence field and sexual abuse field. Then, after I worked there for a while, I moved to a domestic violence shelter program, and I worked there for a long time. So I've seen children and women who have been abused, and I've worked with them very closely for a long time. So that's my background. And I worked in two different states, California and Texas. So I do have a variety of experience in this field. So that's a little bit about me.
All right, thank you, Durdana. Now, in terms of the two cases, I spoke
Yes.
about Imam Ziaul Haq Sheikh, who was in Irving, and then we've
Yes.
had Muhammad Umar Ali. He was in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And they have been in position of leadership, in position of a teacher. And yet it transpired where they took advantage of the situation and the individual's mental and spiritual circumstance. So, starting from there, in that context, how do those individuals and the parents involved there still have that trust in those institutions and in the leadership from a social perspective?
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to say that normally in any abusive situation, sexual or physical violence or religious abuse or emotional abuse, we generally see a dynamic of power and control. So it's all for the perpetrator. It's all about gaining control over someone, controlling someone and gaining power over them. So it's never about, even in a domestic violence situation, it's never about um, sexual gratification or anything like that. It's always about power. So this individual wants power over someone, and they control their behavior. So that's the basic concept of abuse. And so in the religious concept that you're talking about in the cases that you've presented, I would say that yes, these individuals, the primary motivation in these situations would be power and control, because that's what we've seen forever. And about the trust situation, yes. So historically and culturally, we really put people who are in religious situations, in religious institutions, we put them above reproach, right? I mean, I'm from Pakistan, so I can speak to that. In our culture, we have, traditionally we used to have mullahs coming to the house to teach children Quran, right? And it's only in Western society and outside of Pakistan that we see children going to the masjid to learn the Quran and learn about religion. In Pakistan, in India, I'm sure in Bangladesh, in our home countries, we generally have someone coming to the house who'll teach the children Quran and teach them about religion, and they learn about all of that from the family as well, obviously. So we we put them on a pedestal. We put these teachers as above reproach. We trust them implicitly. These are men of God. They will teach us about our religion, because religion, I mean, is a big part of our lives. So that's basically the cultural background that we're coming from, and that is where I think, in a lot of ways, we put too much trust in these people. And when something happens, and a child comes to us and tells us, this is what happened in the masjid today, or so and so did this to me, we are very reluctant to believe our children. And we are very, because these people generally in masajid across the world, the people who are involved are people, even in the board of the masjid, and people who work there are well-known people, well-respected people. And we've seen, and it's not just in Islam, we've seen this, what happened in the Catholic Church, right? So we've seen, we have, people in general seem to have implicit trust in religious leaders, and they believe that they can do no wrong. So that's where we're coming from, unfortunately.
Right. And now also, before I ask my next question, how do we have that conversation with our children from that social perspective here outside of Pakistan? Because the conversation is going to be different in Pakistan. Well, whether it's going to be different, whether it should be different, that's another question. So how do we go about talking to our kids here in this community environment?
I think it's very important uh, to teach our children right from wrong, in the sense of who can do what to you. I mean, I've seen it so many times. I've seen it. Even with doctors, we hear so many horror stories, even of doctors abusing women and abusing children. We've all heard of those cases. So from a very young age, to teach children and talk to them very openly about their bodies, about who can touch them, who cannot touch them, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. It's very important for not just us, but even for people back home, to address those questions and to talk to children about these things openly. Because we have, as a culture, we hide these things, we don't talk about them, we don't discuss them with our children, and especially anything about their bodies. We have a culture of shame, and we never discuss sex with our children. We don't teach them how to approach it, we don't teach them what's right, how they should view it. And it's always considered very shameful. And we have to get rid of that stigma. We have to talk to our children, we have to train them and tell them about stranger danger. And normally, from what I've seen and what all the studies show, people who abuse children, people who groom the children, are mostly, and also not just children, even women, they're mostly known to the victim. So it's stranger rape and stranger sexual abuse is not that common. It mostly comes from within the family or within the close social network of the victim. And we also have to, because in our culture, we teach our children to respect and trust adults, to be very submissive to adults, and we teach them about badtamizi and being very tamizdar and respectful of adults. And that's all fine. We need to maintain our culture and maintain those values. but we also need to teach our children about danger. We need to teach them about what is wrong and what is right, and what is permissible and what is not permissible, how far someone can go with them, how far, and what needs to be stopped right away and what needs to be reported right away.
Right, and you bring up a very good point in terms of reporting. Now, let me ask you before that is we put these religious leaders on a pedestal, and
Right.
even going back in time, Umar, he was asked in open session by a common man, hey, how were you able to have your size stitched with one sheet when your body size clearly needs two sheets? And
Right.
anyone in the masses was able to stand up and ask him that question. And yet, here, in this time, here or there, back home in
Right.
Pakistan, we think twice, oh my God, what is the community going to think about me if I'm going to question the imam or question the board of governors or the leadership?
Right.
So
So
is there
that's the whole
any
point.
right way, or is there you just go about it and you just ask that point blank question?
So that is the whole problem, that there is no accountability. That is the main fundamental point, that we need to make sure that everyone is accountable for what they do. And the problem with children coming home and saying so and so did this, we shroud it in everything is just covered up, everything is shut up, everything is hidden, because we are so ashamed, and we always feel that this is bringing dishonor to our family. If someone finds out something happened to my child, how are they going to perceive me? And it also has a lot to do with our culture of our toxic concept of manhood. And so the father immediately goes into, okay, so I wasn't able to protect my family, and it's he feels almost as if he's been castrated, right? So it's his honor, his power, his standing in the community being brought into question. And with the religious leader, it's again, normally these people are well respected, well known in the community, and people fear going out and talking about it openly, because they won't be believed. Either they won't be believed, or, again, the shame comes in. The whole thing is that we need to be able to discuss these things openly. We need to be able to talk about it, bring it out in the open, report it, hold people accountable. Everything needs to be transparent. So this also goes back to a lot of it comes from the Islamophobia, and that's also a big part of it, because people say, okay, so if the masjid is if we open up our masjid and local authorities are coming in and police is coming in, now in the general community we'll be perceived as, we're adding pedophilia to our list of sins of terrorism and all those things. So it's a very complex question. It's a complex situation, but I think we need to grab the bull by the horns and talk about it openly and bring it out into the open, so that we can protect our children and protect our community at the same time.
Right, and holding the bull by the horn, it goes back to knowing and realizing that preventive measures are always going to be of less serious nature than the corrective aspects of what we do after the fact, because we're also talking about not just one life, we're talking about a family that is going to be destroyed, especially looking at an individual who's going to grow up to be a man or a woman and then start a family and all the baggage that goes with that. So, talking about that, if something is brought to me, I am, let's say, a leader in a community, and something is brought to my attention from a social context, from a group context. How do I go about it? How do I go about it prudently and smartly?
There is no way of not disturbing the ecosystem. You have to, first of all, whoever is being accused, needs to be put on leave or suspended for a while, so that they cannot interact with the children or the person again. They need to be put on, maybe they can be put on leave, right? Not suspended, just taken away from that environment. A full investigation needs to be conducted, and find it, you need to get to the bottom of it. There are, in sexual abuse, there are always signs, and we just don't know what we're looking for, right? So first of all, we also need to educate parents on what to look out for. If they're sending their children to to the masjid, or any even if they're going for sports and they're interacting with the coaches, the parents need to know the signs of any kind of abuse. They need to be on the lookout constantly. They need to be vigilant, and they need to take the child's words seriously. If the child reports something, they need to take it seriously. In the context of you being in a position of power and something being brought to your attention, you need to take it seriously. You need to investigate. You need to look into the matter and not sneak the person out of the country. You need to have it investigated, talk to the children, talk to their friends, talk to the parents, talk to everyone around it, find out what's going on. And obviously, there may be some cases that are not true, but we still need to investigate. We need to find out what's going on, because we need to protect the other children. I had a case when I was working at the domestic violence shelter. I had someone come to me, and she reported that she had been raped the night before by someone who had been who was part of the masjid. He wasn't an imam, but he was part of the administration. So, as a social worker, I sent her straight to the hospital to get a rape kit done. I reported the matter to the police, because that was my job. That was what I had to do. And so, in the case of any person of power who has the ability to do something about it, they need to make sure that they don't sit and hide it. They need to do something about it. They need to find out what's going on. They need to find out if the report is valid, if it's true. And if it turns out to be true, then the perpetrator needs to be brought to justice. That's the only way to keep trust and to restore trust in the institution.
I'm glad you talk about the institution of family also, because in this case, by not doing anything, we're also violating the institution of family, that we're showing our
Exactly.
kids that you're going to tell us something, but I'm not going to look into it because I don't think you're being truthful to me. And then I've lost that credibility that my son's not going to come to me thinking, oh, you know what, he's just not going to do anything, so I might as well not say anything.
And that is so scary for me as a mom, as a community member, because that child, you are damaging that child and the child's psyche for their life, because now something has been done to them that is not right, and they were ignored. They were not validated. Their feelings, their emotions, their everything was not validated. It wasn't taken seriously. So, can you imagine how worthless that child feels, and how worthless that child will feel for the rest of their lives? And they will grow up feeling that. And that has a whole range of psychological impact that um, that will last forever and will impact their relationships. And I'm sure that, I mean, that's a whole different topic that I'm sure you will address. But so this is something that really needs to be taken very seriously. You have to believe your children. Uh, you have to show them that you support them. You have to show them that you have their back.
Now, I'm going to piggyback on this thought that to support your kids and show them that we're there, to what extent is this so-called rationale of, well, this was our fate. It had to happen, so it happened to me or my kid. How much has that rationale become part of our lives?
Okay, so I would say that in the domestic violence field, that is a huge part of our thinking. When girls come to their parents and say, "Okay, my husband is abusing me," a lot of parents say, "Now you're married. This is your fate. You have to put up with it. You have to deal with it. Blah blah blah." So that is a huge part of it. But it should never, ever, I mean, I'm not saying that's right, but that's our thinking, that's our culture. But in this context, I don't think it's so much a part of our thinking. I think shame is more that comes in, and the parents' authority and the parents' ability to not to protect their child is what comes in more. So the parents think that we have failed in, especially the father, thinks that they have failed in their role to protect their child. So maybe the child is lying, maybe it's not true, we'll brush it under the rug, we won't think about it, we won't talk about it, and it'll magically go away. So I don't think in this context, this is our fate is as important or is as much a part of our thinking, but it's more of our machismo, our manhood that's been violated, and so we want to not think about it.
Also, in your experience, to what extent you've seen, where how have we tried to channel this education or this awareness, just even the abuse awareness or sexual abuse in religious institutes awareness, how much have we tried to do something about it on a collective scale, on an institutional scale? I'm talking from leadership standpoint, if you have seen any at all.
I would say we have done nothing, absolutely nothing. In the domestic violence field, when we used to try and talk to the imams and train them for domestic violence training, they were extremely resistant. And I would say that in this area of sexual abuse in our masajid, in our institutions, I think we have done less than nothing. We need to provide trainings to parents, talks to the parents about what to look out for. We need to educate our children, and so they can be aware of what's right and what's wrong, and how far people can go with them, how far they can take liberties with them. And I really haven't seen any any efforts to address this issue. I once went to a youth group of girls, and I spoke to them about domestic violence and sexual abuse, and the girls were completely unaware, and they didn't know anything about it. They were scared to hear all these things, but I would say that we don't talk enough about it. We don't give them enough education, enough information about this at all.
So, and I'm glad you brought it to you talking to those girls and their reaction. So, how do we, on an individual scale and on a community scale, move the conversation from hashtag Me Too to something, say, like not again or not anymore or stop it? How do we cross that bridge?
Well, on an individual basis, I think parents, first of all, parents will need trainings and teachings and talks and information about all of this. And so we need to educate our parents. And once the parents have enough information, they need on, in every household, this should be discussed. every parent needs to discuss these things with their children and to talk to them about it. And, you know, everyone knows about stranger danger, but how, and that's good. The children need to know about that, but that is statistically so far, it's way low than abuse by people who know the family, within the family, people who are teachers, people who are in positions of power with the children. So, so that is a much more important conversation that none of us are having. And we really need to do that. And on a community level, I think we can do these presentations in mosques. We can talk about it at wherever we go. You know, it's a conversation that's just not happening, and we need to start that conversation. There's a Facebook page that I've recently discovered, and it's it's coming from Pakistan. Kasoor Hamara Hai. And I find that to be such an amazing page, because they are really providing so much information, and they're also highlighting cases of abuse that are happening currently in Pakistan. So, so we need those kinds of things on our social media. We need it plastered all over, because we need to be thinking about these things, and we need to be talking about these things.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Kasoor Hamara Hai. I'm definitely going to check that out. And also, I encourage everyone who's listening to check that out. To bring it home, I want to ask you this question, or how many times have you seen mental health professionals engaged within the community? Because I have only come across two psychologists that are of Pakistani or slash Indian origin here in North Texas. And I approached one of them. That gentleman did not want to talk about anything along these lines or previous topics that I've done. And
Okay.
second one I never heard from. So what has been your experience in terms of mental health experts within our community, and how forthcoming have they been?
So at the place I worked at in Texas, we had psychologists who were excellent. But the problem is not that the with our therapists, the problem wasn't that they weren't willing to talk. The problem was the community wasn't willing to receive. So we had the opposite problem. And because we were really pushing to go to masajid, to go to schools, to go anywhere that would listen and talk about these issues. And the community wasn't, the masajid were very resistant. The community didn't want to talk about it, because unfortunately that's our mindset. If we don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. So with us, that was the problem. And I think a lot of times our, first of all, we do have a lot of Pakistani and Indian origin psychologists, but they may not be so willing to talk about it, because again, the community doesn't want to listen. And anyone who talks about these topics is branded, and they say, okay, they're a troublemaker if they're talking openly about these things. They're shameless. They're, all kinds of nonsense. And people don't want to associate with these kinds of people who are very vocal and who are very visible, and they are shunned. So that might be what you that you saw. That might be something, because they've had bad experiences, so that's why they might not be willing to come up and talk about these things. It's a very, our culture is very secretive, and our culture is very filled with shame, and we just don't want to address these things at all. And we want to hide our heads, and I've said it before, we're a community of ostriches. We want to hide our heads and think that, okay, everything is fine, nothing's happening, we're all perfect. And again, Islamophobia also comes into it, because they don't want to put highlight these things in our community, because they don't want to add to our list of sins. And that is, I think we are failing our community, we're failing our children, we're failing our women by not addressing these issues in our community.
Very rightly put. And yes, we have to have that integrated approach across communities, even interfaith approach. As you mentioned, it's not just, the Catholic Church is our Islamic centers, and of course, some other communities also, that we need to address this collectively, because today it's us, tomorrow it might be my neighbor of a different faith, of a different religion, or a different ethnic origin. So a few takeaways, what I have gathered from our conversation: we have got to own the conversation
Exactly.
within the confines of our homes, because we have to start that within
Exactly.
ourselves, and then go outside of our homes, talk about it, because the more we talk about it, less the stigma associated with it would bear down on us. And then once we start doing that, then we've got to realize that we don't have to worry about the culture, because culture is secondary to our faith. Everyone needs to be held accountable, be it a 6-year-old or a 16 or a 46-year-old. So anything you'd like to share with the listeners as we part way?
Okay, so my takeaway really is, I would like to say that this is something that we, as you rightly say, this is not something that we should put in the context of culture. Culture is less important than religion. Our religion teaches us that everyone is accountable. People would go to the Prophet and ask him questions directly. No one is above the law. No one should be able to get away with harming your child. And children, if a child is abused, the impacts carry on for generations, because the child grows up with a lot of issues that will impact their life and their lives and their children's lives after that. So you're basically perpetuating a cycle of violence and a cycle of abuse by ignoring these kinds of issues. It's very important that we address them. It's very important that we protect our children. It's very important that we protect our community, because it's the community, the whole community is impacted by these kinds of acts. If anyone wants to contact me, they can email me, and my email address is durdanaa@gmail.com. And I could maybe, if you want to contact me and have some issues, I could put you in touch with people who can help. And we all need to pull together and look out for one another, and that's a very important point that I want to stress for everyone. We are all responsible for each other's children and each other's safety and each other's lives, and we have to pull together.
Thank you very much, Durdana. Listeners, everything she has said based on her experience, her education, her working with different individuals from different backgrounds and different environments, and recipients of different contexts. So if anyone does have any questions, please do reach out and see how she be able to help. Thank you for listening. I will also continue this conversation next time. In my next episode, I will have as my guest a professional psychotherapist, or you can also say a professional psychologist, as I venture into this conversation from a mental health perspective. Do let me know of any feedback that I can improve everything with. This, once again, is Umair Khan, segment We the People. Keep listening, and I'll see you guys next time.